Rome began as a small settlement on the Palatine Hill in the mid-8th century BC, established through a gradual process of village consolidation rather than a single founding event. Archaeological excavations on the Palatine, Forum Valley, and surrounding hills have uncovered structural remains, domestic pottery, burial grounds, and post-hole patterns dated to the period around 750 BC, confirming the presence of stable habitation. The settlement emerged in a region occupied by Latin-speaking communities whose material culture aligns with what archaeologists classify as the glacial culture. Glacial phases 2 to 3. This provides the earliest historically grounded framework for understanding the community that became Rome. The topography of early Rome shaped its development. The settlement formed atop the Palatine Hill, overlooking the Tiber River and the low-lying area that later became the Forum Romanum. The Tiber provided a dependable water source and facilitated movement between the inland Latin communities and coastal trade centers. The hill offered defensible terrain against raids common among early Italic groups. Contemporary Latin settlements often followed similar patterns, but Rome's location placed it at a junction between Latium to the south and the culturally influential Etruscan territories to the north. This geographical position produced continuous contact through trade, conflict, and migration that influenced organizational and material development. Archaeological layers from the Forum Valley show that seasonal marshland began undergoing systematic drainage in the mid-8th century BC through the construction of early channels. This indicates coordinated communal activity. The transformation of the lowland marsh into a civic space is one of the earliest signs of collective political organization in Rome. The construction effort required labor mobilization and a central authority to plan shared use of the area, anticipating later political and religious structures that developed there. The early population of Rome reflected the diversity of central Italy. Material culture demonstrates Latin origins, but early settlement patterns and burial customs also show influence from neighboring Sabine and Etruscan communities. These interactions occurred through marriage, migration, conflict, and trade, and they shaped the formation of early Roman society. The population was organized into extended kinship units known as gentes. Each gens held land, religious rites, and internal leadership structures. These gentes formed the backbone of early political and social organization, exerting influence through wealth, client networks, and early forms of local authority. Early Rome exhibited clear social stratification. The patricians comprised leading families whose status derived from antiquity, land control, and recognized religious privilege. The plebeians constituted the broader population, small landholders, laborers, artisans, and dependents, who lacked the ancestral authority of patrician families. Evidence from early legal references, later Roman annalistic records, and archaeological patterns suggest that this division emerged early and structured political participation and economic life throughout the monarchy. The political structure of the early Roman kingdom was monarchical. The king, rex, exercised military command, administered justice, oversaw religious functions, and presided over the central political institutions. The Senate served as an advisory council composed of leaders from prominent gentes. Though the precise number of senators in the earliest period is uncertain, their role as a council of elders, patres, is documented through Roman legal and historical tradition supported by institutional continuity into the Republic. The Senate did not legislate independently, but functioned as a body that stabilized succession, debated public matters, and provided counsel to the king. The popular assembly, known as the Curiate Assembly, represented the early collective body of Roman citizens. It was structured around curiae, divisions rooted in social and military organization. The assembly's functions included the ratification of laws proposed by the king and formal involvement in the king's appointment. Evidence for these functions appears in early legal tradition and later constitutional analysis of the monarchy preserved by Roman authors. Kingship in Rome was not strictly hereditary. Succession required selection by the Senate and confirmation by the assembly, creating a system in which aristocratic authority balanced monarchical power. The early kings whose actions are historically grounded appear in Roman records through legal, religious, and institutional continuities. Romulus is credited with forming the Senate, organizing early military units, and structuring civic divisions. While portions of his narrative contain mythological elements, the institutional developments attributed to him align with what is archaeologically visible in the mid-8th century BC. The formation of centralized authority, coordination of communal labor, and establishment of settlement boundaries. The second king, Numa Pompilius, is associated with the organization of priesthoods and the development of religious law. While later embellishments exist, the institutions linked to him, including the office of pontifex and several cultic regulations, reflect genuine early Roman practices attested in later Republican religious records. The early monarchy's integration of religious and civic responsibilities is supported by the fact that Roman kings acted as chief priests, presiding over key rites that maintained the legal and social order. Tullus Hostilius, associated with the third phase of early development, is presented in Roman sources as a military-focused ruler who expanded Roman influence in Latium. Archaeological evidence supports increased settlement density and early military fortification in this period. Hostile interactions between Latin communities during the 7th century BC are attested through regional settlement decline, boundary fortifications, and weapon deposits found throughout Latium. While specific conflicts are recorded in annalistic history, the broader trend of inter-city warfare is historically grounded. Ancus Marcius is noted for urban expansion and infrastructural growth. His reign is associated with the construction of the Pons Sublicius, the earliest recorded Tiber bridge. Though no physical remains survive from the earliest phases, its existence in Republican records and its ritual importance confirm a pre-Republican origin. Development of salt trade routes, expansion toward the river's mouth, and fortification of the Janiculum Hill align with the archaeological record of increased urbanization during the late 7th century BC. The establishment of Ostia as an early coastal outpost is historically plausible based on ancient references and the strategic need to secure access to the Tiber estuary. Significant urban and administrative reforms date to the period traditionally assigned to Tarquinius Priscus and Servius Tullius. Tarquinius Priscus initiated major building projects, including early phases of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's central drainage system. Portions of the system date archaeologically to the 6th century BC, confirming large-scale public works under monarchical oversight. Additional construction attributed to this period includes early monumental temples and the expansion of the Forum as a civic center. Servius Tullius's reign marks a decisive stage in Rome's political and social organization. The introduction of the census reorganized citizens based on property classes for military service and voting. This classification appears in later Roman constitutional law as a foundational component of political structure, and its early origin is supported by parallels in Etruscan administrative practices. The Servian Wall, a defensive circuit constructed around Rome, has archaeological sections that date to the 6th century BC, validating early large-scale fortification. By the late 6th century BC, Rome's internal political tensions intensified. The growing power of aristocratic families strengthened the Senate's influence, while plebeians bore the economic burden of military service, land shortages, and debt. These pressures are documented through later Republican reforms that explicitly reference inequalities rooted in the late monarchy. Disputes over political participation reflected long-standing structural divides between patrician authority and plebeian economic vulnerability. The final phase of the monarchy is defined by the reign of Tarquinius Superbus. Roman historical sources present him as an autocratic ruler who bypassed the Senate and consolidated authority through coercive measures. While some narrative details reflect later moralizing, the underlying fact of monarchical overreach is supported by the institutional rupture that followed his expulsion. Conflicts between leading Roman families and the king are historically attested, and the political crisis of 509 BC marks a constitutional turning point grounded in Roman legal tradition. The monarchy ended in 509 BC when leading aristocrats mobilized against Tarquinius Superbus. The event resulted in the removal of the king and the abolition of the royal office. This transition is securely documented in Roman political memory, preserved through early republican legal structures that prohibited kingship and replaced monarchical authority with annually elected magistrates. The establishment of the consulship, limitations on executive power, and the reaffirmation of Senate authority all reflect an institutional shift rooted in the final years of the monarchy. Rome developed in a landscape defined by hills, river corridors, and plains that shaped every subsequent phase of political and social formation. The settlement occupied a central position in Latium, a region characterized by volcanic topography, fertile soils, and access routes that linked the Italian interior to the Tyrrhenian coast. Archaeological evidence from the 8th to 6th centuries BC demonstrates that Rome's geographic position provided defensive advantages, facilitated trade, and enabled interaction with neighboring Latin and Etruscan communities. These environmental conditions established the structural foundations of the Roman kingdom between 753 and 509 BC. The core of early Rome lay on the Palatine Hill, one of a cluster of 7 elevations overlooking the lower Tiber Valley. Excavations on the Palatine identified huts, post-hole alignments, hearths, storage pits, and domestic pottery typical of glacial cultural phases. The hill's steep slopes limited access, providing a natural fortification against incursions common among central Italian communities during this period. Comparable settlements in Latium, such as Gabii and Alba Longa, also utilized elevated terrain for defense, suggesting a shared regional strategy. Rome's position among these hills offered multiple vantage points, enabling early inhabitants to monitor traffic across the Tiber crossing and the adjacent plains. The Tiber River formed the most influential geographic feature in early Roman development. It provided a consistent water supply, supported agricultural activity in surrounding lowlands, and served as a transportation route linking inland regions to the coastal trading centers near the river's mouth. The ford near Tiber Island, one of the few reliable crossing points in the lower river basin, became a focal point of settlement. Control of this crossing enabled Rome to regulate movement between Etruria to the north and Latial communities to the south. Archaeological and sedimentary studies confirm long-term human use of this crossing point before the establishment of Rome, but its significance increased substantially once the settlement grew into an organized community. The Forum Valley, located between the Palatine and Capitoline Hills, began as marshland periodically flooded by the Tiber. During the mid-8th century BC, evidence shows the construction of drainage channels and the leveling of the area to create a stable, shared civic space. This transformation reflects coordinated labor and early state organization. The valley's position at the base of multiple hills made it a natural meeting point for emerging communities on the Palatine, Esquiline, and Capitoline. Its development symbolized the transition from dispersed hilltop villages to a unified urban center. Rome's location placed it directly on contact routes that linked Latium with Etruria. The Etruscan sphere, located north of the Tiber, produced advanced urban settlements such as Veii, Tarquinia, and Cerveteri. These centers influenced Roman material culture, religious practices, administrative techniques, and architectural development, particularly during the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Ceramic typology, weapon forms, and domestic artifacts recovered from early Roman layers demonstrate increasing Etruscan interaction in this period. The geographic proximity of Rome to the principal route between Veii and the southern Latin cities positioned the settlement to participate in both commercial and political exchanges. To the south, Rome's geography opened access to the Alban Hills and the Latin Plain. The Latins shared linguistic and cultural traditions with Rome's early population, and interactions with these communities shaped Rome's early military and political identity. While the archaeological record confirms periodic conflict among Latin settlements in the 7th and early 6th centuries BC, Rome's location near the Tiber crossing and its expanding urban center provided advantages that contributed to its gradual emergence as a leading power in Latium by the late monarchy. Agricultural potential played a decisive role in Rome's early growth. The volcanic soils of Latium, produced by the Alban volcanic complex, supported grain cultivation, viticulture, and pastoral activities. The plains east and south of Rome provided arable land that sustained population growth throughout the monarchy. Archaeobotanical studies indicate the presence of wheat, barley, legumes, and grape cultivation in the region during the 8th to 6th centuries BC. The availability of cultivable land near a defensible urban center enabled Rome to maintain surplus production and support a growing labor force necessary for early public works. Rome's geography also enabled access to salt, a critical resource for food preservation and economic exchange. The Via Salaria, an early route connecting the Sabine uplands with the Tiber mouth, passed near the future Roman settlement. Salt from the coastal marshes near the Tiber estuary was transported inland along this route. By occupying a position on this corridor, Rome secured a strategic advantage in controlling a commodity essential to regional trade networks. Later records referencing Rome's role in salt distribution indicate continuity from the early monarchy's geographic position. Strategic considerations expanded when the settlement approached the river's mouth. During the reign attributed to Ancus Marcius, sources describe the establishment of a Roman outpost at Ostia. While archaeological evidence at the site does not show a fully developed 7th century settlement, early military or trading activity in the area is consistent with the strategic need to secure the Tiber estuary. Control of the mouth prevented rival powers from limiting river access and strengthened Rome's position in regional trade. The Tiber's estuarine environment also facilitated timber movement from inland forests, supporting early building activity in the urban center. The hills surrounding early Rome formed a structural defense network. The Capitoline Hill, with cliffs on multiple sides, became the site of early fortifications whose foundations are visible in archaic period walls. The Palatine and Aventine Hills created additional defensive zones that protected the central settlement from eastern and southern approaches. These hills constrained the movement of hostile forces and enabled Rome to defend its civic core effectively. Compared with other Latin settlements lacking similar clustered elevations, Rome's topography provided a measurable military advantage. Geographic realities shaped early military organization. Rome's proximity to the river crossing required constant monitoring and defense, contributing to the development of structured militias composed of landowning male citizens. Early Roman military equipment, spearheads, shields, helmets, and defensive gear, found in archaic layers parallels equipment found in Latin and Etruscan contexts, indicating shared military practices across the region. The city's location at the boundary between Latin and Etruscan territories necessitated a defensive posture that later transformed into calculated expansion. The Tiber Valley facilitated long-distance trade routes extending beyond Latium. Goods moving between the interior Apennine communities and coastal trading sites passed near Rome. Imported wares found in early Roman archaeological layers, such as Greek pottery, Euboean ceramics, and Etruscan fineware, demonstrate Rome's participation in broader Mediterranean trade networks by the late 7th century BC. The settlement's location near navigable sections of the Tiber made it a convenient redistribution point for goods entering and leaving central Italy. Urban expansion during the monarchy depended on geographic features that supported development. The availability of clay in the surrounding hills supported early ceramic production and building materials. Timber resources from nearby forests allowed the construction of dwellings, defensive structures, and communal buildings. Stone quarrying increased significantly during the 6th century BC as Rome developed more monumental architecture. The geological diversity of the region provided abundant construction materials that enabled large-scale projects such as the Cloaca Maxima and early temple complexes. The Servian Wall, whose construction is attributed to the 6th century BC, reflects both geographic adaptation and political consolidation. Built along natural ridges and leveraging steep slopes, the wall integrated the hills into a single defensive circuit. Archaeological remains of the wall, including tufa blocks and foundational trenches, show a coordinated effort to fortify the city against external threats. The scale of construction indicates the presence of centralized authority and access to substantial labor, supported by the surrounding agricultural hinterland. The geographic relationship between Rome and Veii illustrates the strategic challenges of the period. Veii, located approximately 15 kilometers northwest of Rome, controlled important routes in southern Etruria and maintained territorial interests along the Tiber. Proximity to this established Etruscan center required Rome to invest in defensive fortifications and maintain a posture of readiness. Evidence from both Roman and Etruscan contexts shows intermittent hostilities during the later monarchy, shaped by competition for river access and regional influence. Geography also structured political boundaries. The Tiber delineated the northern limit of early Roman influence, with the river serving as both a natural barrier and a contested frontier. The Latin plain extended Rome's influence southward, with agricultural expansion and settlement activity documented in surrounding territories. The early monarchy's geographic foothold provided the spatial foundation for later republican territorial growth. Rome's strategic position produced continuous interaction with neighboring peoples, shaping its institutional development. The cultural exchange visible in archaeology, ceramics, weaponry, burial rites, and architectural forms reflects the integration of external influences into Roman society. The city's location at the crossroads of significant routes ensured that the Roman kingdom developed institutions capable of managing trade, defending territory, and administering a growing population. The population occupying the area that became Rome consisted of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan groups who lived within the region surrounding the lower Tiber Valley during the 8th to 6th centuries BC. Archaeological findings from the Palatine, Esquiline, Capitoline, and Quirinal hills confirm clusters of small settlements predating the unified urban community. Excavated hut foundations, ceramics, burial sites, and defensive earthworks document a mixed population organized around kinship groups and territorial divisions. These settlements gradually coalesced into a single political community as trade, intermarriage, and shared defensive needs strengthened connections between the hilltop populations. The earliest identifiable social structure in this period was the gens, a kinship-based unit documented in early Roman legal traditions, and later codified in Republican-era writings describing the inheritance rights, naming conventions, and religious obligations associated with these groups. Archaeological evidence supports a social environment in which extended families held collective burial rights, property rights, and religious responsibilities. The gens served as the foundation for early civic organization, providing manpower for defense and labor for public works. Members of each gens recognized shared ancestry and participated in common rights, and the group's internal leadership coordinated legal and economic obligations. Alongside the gentes, the city's population was grouped into curiae, smaller divisions that functioned as administrative and military subunits. These divisions appear in Rome's earliest institutional frameworks and are consistently referenced in surviving records concerning voting procedures and religious festivals. The curiae provided the structural basis for early political assemblies and military levies. Their documented role in the comitia curiata confirms their importance in authorizing legal acts, approving early magistracies, and witnessing significant civil transactions. A broader territorial organization took shape as Rome expanded beyond individual hilltop settlements. The population was divided into tribes, originally 3, the Rams, Titis, and Lusres. These tribal divisions are attested in early constitutional references preserved by later historians and supported by patterns in settlement distribution. The tribes supplied regiments for military service and functioned as geographical and administrative districts. Their composition indicates integration of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan populations, but the exact ethnic distribution within each tribe is not recoverable from surviving evidence. By the 7th and 6th centuries BC, a clear hierarchical social order is visible in both material culture and legal tradition. The patricians, identified as leading families with hereditary political and religious privileges, held dominant positions in early governance. Their status is confirmed by later republican references to patrician-exclusive priesthoods, landholding patterns, and the Senate's original composition. Patrician authority rested on control of land, wealth, and the main priestly offices, as well as the right to interpret customary law. Most inhabitants belonged to the plebeian class, a broad category comprising small landholders, artisans, laborers, and dependents lacking patrician privileges. Plebeians participated in military service and agricultural production, forming the labor base supporting urban expansion. Archaeological findings, including modest dwellings on the lower slopes of the hills and simple grave goods, reflect varied economic status within the plebeian population. No records from the kingdom period describe plebeians as politically organized, but their increasing numbers and roles in the economy are essential for understanding the later constitutional reforms introduced at the end of the monarchy. A third status group consisted of clients, individuals bound to patrician patrons through formalized dependency relationships. This system, described in early Roman legal practice and referenced in Republican-era legal discussions, established obligations of service and protection. Clients provided labor, military support, and economic contributions to patrons in exchange for legal representation, material assistance, and protection. Archaeological evidence of housing clusters near patrician residences and economic distribution patterns corroborates the existence of such dependency networks during the kingdom period. The population also included slaves, acquired through warfare or trade. Their presence is documented indirectly through terminology appearing in early legal formulas and later references to servile labor in household and agricultural contexts. Slaves formed part of domestic households and worked in agricultural production, though the scale of slavery increased significantly after the establishment of the Republic. The integration of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan populations is traceable through material culture. Latin influence dominated language and early legal terminology, while Sabine influence appears in religious customs and settlement patterns on the Quirinal Hill. Etruscan influence is evident in architectural techniques, pottery styles, and religious iconography introduced in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Etruscan presence is confirmed through archaeological remains and cultural markers associated with elites, particularly in the introduction of monumental building practices. Settlements during the early kingdom remained clustered around hilltops with defensive advantages. The Palatine, Capitoline, and Quirinal hills housed early communities with fortified positions, while lower-lying areas, such as the Forum Valley, gradually transitioned from marshland to civic space due to drainage efforts. Archaeological evidence documents increasing urban coordination through unified fortifications, shared sanctuaries, and coordinated construction projects that required social organization beyond individual neighborhoods. The household served as the basic social and economic unit. Each household consisted of a family group, dependents, and enslaved individuals under the authority of the paterfamilias. Property was transmitted through the male line, and customary law governed inheritance, adoption, and guardianship. Evidence of household structure appears in burial customs. early Roman legal formulations and patterns of domestic architecture uncovered in excavations. Religious practice intersected with social organization, though only the institutional elements documented through early priesthoods and public rites can be addressed historically. The presence of priestly offices such as the pontifices, augurs, and flamens is attested through early Roman annals and inscriptions referring to the continuity of these institutions from the kingdom into the republic. These offices were primarily held by patricians, reinforcing the association between elite families and control over public religious functions. Ritual calendars preserved in later records show that religious responsibilities were integrated into community governance and contributed to the cohesion of different population groups within the expanding urban center. Economic organization varied across social classes. Patricians controlled large agricultural estates on the surrounding plains, while plebeians typically managed smaller plots on family holdings. Clients often worked on the estates of their patrons or provided specialized labor. Artisans and metalworkers operated in designated areas, producing tools, weapons, and household items identified through archaeological remains. Trade connections along the Tiber facilitated the exchange of goods such as salt, agricultural produce, and pottery with communities in Latium and Etruria. The integration of different ethnic groups occurred gradually through shared political structures rather than through documented treaties or mass migrations. Latin communities contributed to the early demographic core. Sabines occupied parts of the northeastern hills, and Etruscan influence increased significantly during the 7th and 6th centuries BC with the rise of Etruscan urban centers north of the Tiber. Intermarriage, trade exchanges, religious adoption, and political incorporation contributed to the consolidation of a unified Roman civic identity rooted in shared institutions rather than shared ancestry. The organization of early military service also reflects social stratification and demographic integration. Only free males with property could serve in the early militia, as documented in later Roman references describing pre-Servian military classifications. Patricians formed leadership ranks, while plebeians supplied the bulk of the infantry forces. Equipment distribution patterns identified through early weapon deposits suggest varied levels of armament correlated with economic status. Social mobility during the kingdom was limited, though not absent. Individuals could rise in status through wealth accumulation, military achievement, or patronage relationships. Some families that later appear as patrician may have achieved prominence during late monarchical urban consolidation. However, documented political offices remained restricted to hereditary elite families. By the 6th century BC, the social structure of Rome was established sufficiently to support large-scale urban development. The concentration of power among patrician lineages allowed coordinated decision-making on infrastructure projects, while the plebeian population provided labor for construction and agricultural production. The political structure of the Roman kingdom between 753 and 509 BC was formed through a gradual consolidation of authority as small Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan settlements merged into an urban center. Archaeological layers on the Palatine, Capitoline, and Quirinal hills document habitation before the emergence of centralized rule, and the earliest surviving literary and epigraphic evidence indicates that political authority during this period concentrated around institutions that later continued into the Republic: the Rex, king, the Senate, and the assemblies. While early records were limited and partially reconstructed during the Republic, The core framework is verifiable through preserved legal formulas, later constitutional references, and consistent institutional continuity from the 6th century BC onward. The monarchy represented the central authority. The Rex exercised combined military, judicial, and religious power. The king's position was not hereditary and did not follow dynastic succession. Instead, election procedures involved approval by the Senate and ratification through the populace assembled in curiae. This framework appears in the later Roman legal tradition, which preserved remnants of the Lex Curiata de Imperio, a law conferring the king's right to command. The persistence of this law into the Republic demonstrates that the process originated in the kingdom and functioned as the mechanism by which supreme authority was legally transferred. The king's power rested first on imperium, the recognized legal competence to lead armies, prescribe punishments, and administer civil justice. Later Republican descriptions of imperium align with earlier royal authority, indicating that the office of Rex served as the model for the later consular powers. Surviving accounts describe the king convening assemblies, presiding over legal cases, and appointing subordinate officials for specialized functions. The Rex also held religious authority, performing state rituals, declaring festival days, and interpreting the obligations of the community toward the gods. Evidence for this includes the later retention of the Rex Sacrorum, an office designed to preserve the religious functions of the king after the monarchy had ended. Supporting the king was the Senate, a council originally composed of leading household heads from prominent patrician families. The Senate did not legislate during the kingdom, nor did it wield sovereign authority, but it operated as an advisory body and held decisive influence during transitions of power. In periods without a king, the Senate selected an interrex to oversee the nomination process for a successor. This process continued into the early Republic and confirms the Senate's role in royal succession during the kingdom. The Senate also supervised early administrative matters, such as decisions related to land boundaries, warfare, and the integration of new families or groups into Rome's political structure. Evidence for senatorial composition and continuity appears in Republican-era lists of patrician gentes whose origins trace to the kingdom. The Curiate Assembly, Comitia Curiata, represented the earliest form of popular assembly. Organized along 30 curiae, territorial and kinship-based units recognized in both archaeological and legal traditions. The assembly formally conferred authority on the king and participated in major political actions requiring public sanction. Its functions included ratifying laws proposed by the king, witnessing adoptions and wills under early Roman legal practice, and confirming decisions that affected the populus Romanus as a body politic. The existence of the assembly is supported by later legal texts that reference its ceremonial functions, particularly the conferral of imperium and the witnessing of major civil acts. Below the level of these formal institutions, early Rome's political order relied on clan-based organization. The gentes constituted extended kinship groups with internal rights, obligations, and leadership structures. Evidence of gens-level authority persists in early Roman religious rites and proprietary laws, including the sacred gentilitia, hereditary cult obligations tied to specific lineages. The political influence of patrician gentes emerged as these families dominated the Senate and provided many of the early kings. Their economic power, particularly in land ownership and agricultural production, helped structure early political competition and governance. Each king introduced specific developments that shaped the maturing political system. Romulus, the earliest historically referenced ruler, organized the Senate and distributed the population into curiae. Although records from this period are limited, the Senate's existence and curiae-based organization are confirmed by later constitutional structures. Under subsequent kings, religious, legal, administrative, and territorial reforms altered how authority functioned within the kingdom. Numa Pompilius formalized priesthoods and religious offices that later survived into the Republic, such as the pontifices and flamens. These offices handled ritual obligations and legal matters tied to religious authority, reducing the king's administrative burden and establishing stable procedural practices. Tullus Hostilius expanded Rome's political influence through warfare, incorporating conquered populations and modifying existing governance to address a growing urban and territorial base. The inclusion of the Alban population after the destruction of Alba Longa is historically attested through Roman tradition and supported by archaeological evidence of settlement expansion in the 7th century BC. Although the specifics of administrative integration are less detailed, the increase in population and landholdings required adjustments in military and legal oversight. Ancus Marcius strengthened the institutional relationship between Rome and the surrounding territories by establishing colonies and asserting control over the Tiber mouth. Evidence of early Roman control of Ostia appears in later records of salt production and trade administration, suggesting that Rome's political institutions had expanded to manage resources beyond the immediate urban center. The political structure became more complex under the later kings, particularly with the reforms attributed to Servius Tullius. These reforms are the earliest politically transformative changes that appear in multiple independent Roman accounts and remain consistent with archaeological findings. Servius introduced the census, which categorized citizens based on wealth and military obligations, and reorganized voting structures according to centuries rather than curiae. This development reduced the kinship-based political framework and linked political participation to economic status and military utility. The shift from curiae to centuries marked a structural transition that survived into the Republic and formed the basis of the comitia centuriata. The census also served administrative and fiscal functions. Evaluating property holdings enabled systematic assessment of military service obligations and created an early framework for taxation. The introduction of geographical tribes further diversified political representation and tied citizenship responsibilities to residence as well as lineage. Servius Tullius also implemented territorial fortifications, including the Servian Wall. Archaeological remains of 6th century fortifications on the Aventine, Quirinal, and Esquiline hills corroborate ancient accounts of urban boundaries established during his rule. These constructions required administrative oversight, resource coordination, and state-directed labor, demonstrating the growing capability of the royal government to mobilize large-scale infrastructure projects. The political structure reached its final form under Tarquinius Superbus, whose rule marked a departure from earlier governance norms. Surviving sources consistently record his reduction of senatorial influence, consolidation of decision-making within the royal court, and reliance on force and intimidation to maintain authority. While details must be interpreted cautiously due to later Republican bias, multiple accounts preserve the same structural shifts. The Senate's marginalization, extra-legal punishments, and extensive use of state labor for monumental construction, including the completion of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Archaeological evidence confirms the construction timeline and scale of this temple, supporting accounts of centralized state control over public works. Tarquinius Superbus's concentration of authority disrupted the balance between the monarchy and aristocratic families. Records from the early republic emphasized political conflict and resistance among patrician groups immediately before the monarchy's fall. These tensions culminated in the expulsion of Tarquinius in 509 BC, an event consistently referenced across Roman historical traditions and anchored by the institutional transformations that followed. After the king's removal, the Republic replaced the singular authority of the Rex with annually elected magistrates holding imperium, dual leadership to prevent autocracy, and stronger roles for the Senate and assemblies. By the end of the kingdom in 509 BC, Rome had developed a political system blending monarchical authority, aristocratic oversight, and popular participation through assemblies. Its institutions, imperium, the Senate, the census, territorial tribes, the curiate assembly, and early legal administrative offices, formed the structural foundation for the Roman Republic and, subsequently, for centuries of constitutional evolution. Rome entered the late 8th century BC as a cluster of settlements on the Palatine, Esquiline, and Quirinal hills, in a region undergoing rapid transformations in social complexity, political consolidation, and intercommunity alliances. Archaeological evidence from habitation layers, burial practices, fortification lines, and material culture demonstrates that this period marked the emergence of Rome as a structured community with increasing central coordination. Although later Roman tradition attributes the establishment of major institutions to specific founders, no contemporary records exist to confirm individuals. What can be documented is the gradual formation of political and religious structures that formed the core of the Roman state during the first phase of the monarchy. Settlement remains from the late 8th century BC indicate a transition from dispersed pastoral communities to nucleated urban organization. Excavations on the Palatine Hill reveal huts constructed with wattle and daub walls, wooden posts, and thatched roofs, arranged in a patterned layout, suggesting community planning rather than individual self-sufficient households. Additional hut foundations uncovered near the Forum area confirm a coordinated settlement cluster, implying early mechanisms for dispute resolution, resource allocation, and defense. These developments align with broader patterns of state formation in Latium and the Tyrrhenian corridor, where other communities such as Gabii, Veii, and Fideni exhibited similar transitions toward political centralization. The emergence of a royal office is inferred from comparative Italic models and later Roman legal practice. Although the names of early kings are not historically verifiable, the monarchy, as a political form, is evidenced by the concentration of judicial, military, and religious authority under a single office in the earliest known Roman legal and ritual structures. This is supported by the later Roman distinction between the king's religious role, rex sacrorum, and secular magistracies, suggesting that the pre-republican king held unified authority that was later divided to prevent excessive concentration of power. Early Rome thus functioned under a central figure responsible for arbitrary. Institutional continuity is visible in the formation of the Senate. Archaeological evidence does not identify its origin, but the existence of a council of elders advising the king is attested in early republican constitutional descriptions. Moreover, the Senate's later division into patres, foundational aristocratic lineages, indicates that prominent families held advisory roles from the earliest period. Burial evidence from the 8th and 7th centuries BC shows elite differentiation in grave goods, confirming the presence of a social stratum capable of exercising political influence. These elite families likely formed the nucleus of the early advisory council. The Curiate Assembly, composed of citizen groupings known as curiae, also appears to originate in this early period. Its documented role in the later monarchy, ratifying the appointment of kings, witnessing legal acts, and participating in religious functions, suggests it existed before the 6th century BC. The structure of curiae reflects earlier kinship-based divisions transitioning into formal civic bodies. Evidence from nearby Latin communities supports this interpretation, as clan-based assemblies across Latium evolved into institutionalized political structures during this time. The development of an organized army is also traceable to this phase. Material findings, such as weaponry deposits and standard burial equipment, indicate that warfare in Latium during the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC involved coordinated infantry forces drawn from landowning male citizens. Later Roman military organization, centuries, maniples, and class-based levy structures, has roots in these early practices. The use of the Tiber River as a transportation and logistical route positioned Rome to field militia forces capable of defending territory and conducting limited offensive operations. Religious structures in this early period are documented through archaeological layers at sites later associated with major temples. The earliest phases of the Temple of Vesta and the Regia contain material dating to the 8th and 7th centuries BC, demonstrating that centralized religious administration existed from the kingdom's earliest stage. The Regia's layout indicates a building used for ritual and administrative purposes, consistent with the king's dual role in governance and religion. Records of later Roman priesthoods, such as the pontifices and flamens, indicate continuity with early religious offices, though their specific formation dates remain uncertain. Urban development during this phase is also demonstrated by the transformation of the Forum Valley. Initially marshy, the area began to be drained through primitive channels by the late 8th century BC, allowing it to function as a communal gathering space. Pottery distribution and habitation patterns suggest it served as a market and civic center, providing a focal point for inter-hill interaction. The Forum became the geographical and administrative core of the early city, structuring political and economic activity. Laws and social regulations of the earliest monarchy remain largely undocumented, but later Roman legal tradition preserves fragments indicating that the king acted as the chief judge. The Rex was responsible for enforcing customary law, resolving disputes, and overseeing public order. This structure aligns with the earliest Indo-European legal frameworks, in which the leader served as both military commander and supreme judicial authority. The existence of officiales, priests involved in diplomacy and declarations of war, is documented in early Republican sources, but likely originated in this period, reflecting institutionalized procedures for foreign interactions. Economic organization in the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC shows increasing specialization. Evidence of pottery workshops, metalworking, and textile production indicates a shift from subsistence-level production to a mixed economy integrating trade with neighboring communities. The exchange of goods along the Tiber and through land routes connected Rome to the broader trade networks of Latium and Etruria. Imported goods such as Etruscan bronze items and Greek pottery reveal external cultural influence and commercial integration. These exchanges contributed to the growth of a stratified society, with elite families accumulating wealth through land ownership and trade partnerships. Population growth during this period is supported by habitation density across the hills. Excavations reveal clustered settlements expanding outward from the Palatine core, with new residential areas appearing on the Celian and Aventine hills by the early 7th century BC. An increased population required more formalized administration, leading to the establishment of civic structures governing labor, taxation, and land distribution. Although documentation is sparse, later Roman land laws imply that early monarchs regulated public and private land, ensuring agricultural productivity and military readiness. The early monarchy's diplomatic relations are partially visible through treaties preserved or referenced in later texts. The most notable is the treaty between Rome and Carthage, later recorded by Polybius, traditionally dated to the late monarchy. Although outside the time frame of the earliest phase, its existence demonstrates that Rome engaged in formal diplomacy using established protocols likely rooted in earlier practices. Interactions with Latin communities such as Alba Longa, Fideni, and Gabii are also attested through later annalistic references and archaeological data, showing conflict and exchange. These relationships shaped early territorial boundaries and set precedents for later military and political expansion. The consolidation of authority in this phase created the foundation for subsequent institutional developments. The unification of political, military, and religious authority in the monarchy established a stable administrative framework that allowed for infrastructural projects, economic growth, and urban expansion. The Senate and Assembly provided consultative and participatory structures, balancing the central power of the king. Administrative offices, though not yet formalized into the later republican magistracies, existed as functional components supporting governance and ritual performance. By the mid-7th century BC, Rome had evolved from a cluster of hilltop villages into a unified community with organized leadership, social hierarchy, central religious institutions, and growing political influence in Latium. The structures established during this early period remained integral to Roman political life throughout the monarchy and shaped the constitutional framework of the Republic. The foundational institutions, centralized authority, advisory councils, citizen assemblies, organized military levy, priestly offices, and regulated economic activity, formed the durable core of Roman governance from which later developments emerged. Rome entered the mid-7th century BC as an increasingly structured polity with a centralized authority, an expanding population, and growing inter-community interactions throughout Latium and southern Etruria. Material evidence, settlement patterns, and the archaeological visibility of conflict and integration during this period indicate that Rome shifted from a primarily defensive community to one actively engaged in territorial consolidation. Later Roman tradition places several wars, conquests, and institutional developments in this period and assigns them to specific monarchs. But the absence of contemporary written documentation requires analysis strictly through verifiable archaeological data and early legal or diplomatic references. The historical record supports a clear pattern of expansion, military formalization, and infrastructural investment during the mid-monarchical era. Archaeological evidence from the sites of Alba Longa, Fidene, and Gabii shows changes in settlement structures consistent with broader regional conflict and consolidation in the mid-7th century BC. Alba Longa displays signs of declining autonomy by this period, marked by reduced elite burials and less construction activity. These developments align with the emergence of Rome as a dominant center in the Latin plain. The later existence of the Latin League, a confederation of Latin communities, indicates the earlier integration or subordination of certain settlements under Rome's expanding influence. While the exact mechanisms of Rome's dominance over Alba Longa and related communities cannot be documented through battle narratives, material patterns show a shift in regional hierarchy, with Rome increasingly positioned as the central authority. Gabii provides stronger archaeological support for direct Roman involvement. Excavations have revealed Roman-style fortifications and urban planning elements that appear in Gabii during the later 7th and early 6th centuries BC. A treaty between Rome and Gabii, later referenced by Dionysius of Halicarnassus, confirms formal political relations. Although the surviving references are much later, the existence of a treaty tradition suggests recognized boundaries, negotiated agreements, and possibly earlier conflict leading to Rome's influence over Gabii's civic affairs. Architectural evidence at Gabii aligns with this trajectory, supporting the interpretation that Rome exerted increasing control during this period. Fidene, located north of the Tiber, also shows evidence of interaction with Rome during the Middle Monarchy. Archaeological remains indicate destruction layers and shifts in material culture consistent with conflict and subsequent Roman integration. Fidene's strategic position along the Tiber, near key routes toward Etruria, made it a significant location for controlling movement and trade. Its eventual incorporation into Roman territory is attested in Republican-era records, implying an earlier phase of military engagement during the monarchy. These regional developments required a more formalized military structure than the loosely organized militias of earlier centuries. The Roman levy, delectus, began to show signs of standardization, with citizen soldiers organized according to property qualifications and age groups. Although the later Servian military reforms are dated to the late monarchy, the foundational class-based levy structure can be traced to this middle phase. Archaeological evidence of standardized weaponry and shields from Roman contexts of the mid-7th century BC suggests greater organization in equipment distribution. Cemetery finds indicate stratified warrior burials, where individuals interred with weapons reflect a class of full-armed infantry distinct from lighter-armed or unarmed groups. This is consistent with the emergence of a structured infantry force drawn from landholding citizens responsible for providing their own arms. Regional conflict in Latium during this period necessitated strategic fortifications. Excavations on the Palatine, Capitoline, and Quirinal hills reveal fortification walls dating to the 7th century BC, constructed using tufa blocks. These fortifications strengthened Rome's defensive perimeter, suggesting increased concern for external threats or the need to secure recently expanded boundaries. Their construction aligns with similar contemporary fortification efforts at other Latin and Etruscan centers, reflecting broader regional militarization. The Tiber River played an essential role in the geopolitical dynamics of this period. River access enabled the movement of goods, facilitated communication with Etruria, and allowed Rome to control crossings and transportation routes. The earliest version of the Pons Sublicius, the wooden bridge later associated with Rome's early kings, likely dates to this era. Although its exact construction date is debated, its existence is well attested in Republican-era legal and ritual traditions. The bridge provided strategic military and commercial advantages by enabling rapid troop movement and controlling the primary crossing point over the Tiber. Its maintenance under state oversight demonstrates the presence of coordinated infrastructural management. Rome's growing influence is further indicated by the development of Ostia, located near the Tiber's mouth. While its traditional foundation is assigned to a later king, archaeological surveys show settlement activity and salt marsh exploitation at the site during the 7th and early 6th centuries BC. The region's salt flats held economic importance, and control over salt production and distribution contributed to the strengthening of Rome's economic standing. The movement of goods along the Tiber between Ostia and Rome reflects the city's expanding commercial profile. Urban expansion during this period accompanied military and territorial growth. Excavations in the Forum area show that the drainage efforts begun in earlier centuries continued and intensified. Channels and retaining structures from the mid-7th century BC facilitated construction and allowed the Forum to develop into a more permanent civic center. Public spaces for markets, assemblies, and judicial proceedings began to take shape, reflecting increased administrative complexity. The spatial reorganization of the Forum corresponded with the broader institutional consolidation taking place across Rome. The administrative capacity of the monarchy expanded accordingly. Although individual office holders remain unidentified in contemporary records, the existence of priestly colleges, legal procedures, and diplomatic protocols indicates the presence of organized administrative structures. The Collegium Officialis, responsible for diplomatic rituals and declarations of war, likely operated during this period. Their function, documented extensively in Republican sources, required procedural continuity dating back to the monarchy. Their ritual processes, including treaty-making and dispute arbitration, demonstrate that Rome conducted formal diplomacy with neighboring communities during this era. Religious structures continued to grow in scale and complexity. The Regia, located near the Forum, underwent further construction during the mid-7th century BC. Architectural phases from this period indicate a shift toward more durable construction materials and institutionalized use. The Regia functioned as the administrative center for religious oversight and housed records and ritual equipment. The Temple of Vesta maintained continuity, and additional cult sites began to appear, reflecting the increasing organization of Rome's religious life. These developments highlight the integration of religion with governance and the central role of ritual authority in legitimizing political and military activities. Economic growth accompanied territorial and institutional development. The expansion of Rome's influence into Latium and control over strategic routes enhanced trade opportunities. Pottery evidence shows increased imports from Etruria, Campania, and Greek colonies, indicating Rome's participation in broader Mediterranean exchange networks. At the same time, Roman artisans produced ceramics, tools, and textiles for regional markets. The presence of workshops, especially on the Esquiline and Quirinal hills, points to early industrial specialization. Evidence of ironworking and bronze casting in Roman contexts indicates a growing metalworking industry tied to both military equipment and domestic tools. This industrial activity supported military campaigns by providing standardized weapons and contributed to economic differentiation within society. Land organization became increasingly structured as Rome expanded its territorial control. Archaeological survey data from the surrounding countryside show field boundaries and rural settlements associated with agricultural intensification during this period. Expansion into the Campagna Romana provided Rome with fertile land for grain, vineyards, and livestock. Land control played a direct role in military organization, as property ownership determined inclusion in the levy. The agricultural surplus generated through rural expansion strengthened Rome's capacity to sustain military operations and urban growth. The relationship between Rome and Etruscan communities intensified during this period. Material evidence shows strong cultural exchange, especially in pottery styles, architectural techniques, and religious practices. While political domination by Etruscan cities over Rome in the mid-monarchical period is not supported by firm documentary evidence, the archaeological record confirms significant cultural interconnectedness. The increasing presence of Etruscan goods in Rome suggests active trade and potential diplomatic ties. The use of Etruscan architectural methods in fortifications and temples during this period further demonstrates technical exchange. These influences contributed to the institutional and cultural development of Rome without implying external political control. By the early 6th century BC, Rome's population and territorial boundaries had grown significantly. Material remains document the expansion of habitation areas onto the Celian and Aventine hills. Urban planning became more systematic, with streets, drainage channels, and building foundations showing coordinated construction. The emergence of standardized building practices reflects enhanced administrative oversight and the capacity to mobilize labor for public works. Terracing projects on the hillsides indicate efforts to expand usable land and accommodate population growth. The growing complexity of Roman society required more formal dispute resolution and governance mechanisms. Although legal codes from this period have not survived, the existence of judicial functions within the monarchy is supported by early Roman legal terminology preserved into the Republic. The king held supreme judicial authority, arbitrating disputes and issuing decisions based on customary law. The presence of scribes and record keepers is inferred from the administrative needs of treaties, religious records, and legal pronouncements. These roles emerged as part of the increasing institutional sophistication of the mid-monarchical period. Diplomatic interactions continued to expand beyond Latium. References to treaties preserved in later annals, though not contemporary, represent a tradition of formalized agreements with external powers. The earliest recorded treaty with Carthage, traditionally dated to the late monarchy, suggests earlier groundwork in diplomatic conduct. Rome's strategic location between Etruria, Campania, and central Italy provided opportunities and challenges that required an organized foreign policy. The existence of ritual protocols for treaty-making indicates that by the early 6th century BC, Rome had developed recognized mechanisms for managing interstate relations. Military expansion during this period also contributed to changes in civic identity. Participation in the levy became a defining characteristic of citizenship, establishing obligations and privileges that persisted throughout Roman history. Landholding citizens formed the core of military power, while dependent populations and non-landowners held limited political influence. This model established the foundation for the class-based military and political system that later dominated the Republic. The reigns of Tarquinius Priscus and Servius Tullius reflect the most documented phase of the Roman kingdom's institutional growth before the final century, leading to the monarchy's collapse. Surviving Roman historical works record their names and actions, while archaeological evidence from the 7th and 6th centuries BC confirms significant expansions in Rome's infrastructure, administrative categorization, military organization, and territorial consolidation. Although surviving records from this era are fragmentary, enough physical and textual evidence remains to establish a reliable framework for the developments attributed to the two rulers. By the early 6th century BC, Rome already consisted of multiple hills united politically, with a population incorporating Latins, Sabines, and a substantial Etruscan presence. The expansion of settlement layers on the Capitoline, Palatine, and Esquiline hills aligns with the chronological placement of Tarquinius Priscus. This era marked intensified construction projects across the urban core. Archaeological studies in the Forum Valley demonstrate the transformation of a marshy basin into a civic center through systematic drainage engineering. The project corresponds with the period in which Roman historians attribute large-scale infrastructural initiatives to Tarquinius Priscus. The earliest verifiable large public works structure associated with this period is the Cloaca Maxima. Excavations confirm that a major drainage canal was constructed in the 6th century BC, redirecting water from the Forum Valley into the Tiber. The engineering techniques, particularly the arch-like stone construction and layered substructure, reflect influence from broader Etruscan building practices. The existence of this drainage system established the foundation for the Roman Forum's development as an administrative and commercial hub. Contemporaneous layers in the Forum show the establishment of paved areas, drainage channels, and the earliest evidence of concentrated religious and political buildings. Although specific attributions to individual rulers cannot be verified beyond the annalistic tradition, the infrastructure itself is materially dated, confirming a coordinated program of urban transformation at this stage of the monarchy. Tarquinius Priscus is also linked in Roman sources to early expansions of the city's defensive structures. Archaeological remnants of early stone fortifications on the Capitoline Hill align with construction techniques from the early 6th century BC. These walls strengthen the city's ability to manage regional conflicts with neighboring Latin and Etruscan communities. Their construction indicates an emerging central authority capable of mobilizing labor on a large scale and organizing skilled stonemasonry. The same period saw the enlargement of the Comitium area, the political center located adjacent to the Forum. Stratigraphic evidence indicates a reshaping of the space with a circular or semicircular form consistent with early assembly use. This development reflects the consolidation of civic procedures already in practice. The Senate meeting place, public assemblies, and judicial activities required permanent administrative spaces. The reforms associated with Servius Tullius are among the most widely attested institutional developments in Rome's early history. Roman annalists record that he reorganized the population into census-based classes for military and political purposes. While the precise details vary across ancient authors, the core structure, placing citizens into categories based on assessed property, aligns with institutional patterns in other central Italian societies of the period. The archaeological record supports the view that a significant expansion of Rome's population and territory occurred during the period associated with Servius. Settlement evidence on the Esquiline Hill indicates organized urbanization, including boundary walls, habitation clusters, and roadways. These developments demonstrate that the city's administrative system required broader categorization of citizens and more sophisticated resource management. The census reform assigned citizens to classes for military service according to property assessment. This allowed the monarchy to field structured military units equipped according to standardized categories. Although exact troop numbers or classifications cannot be reliably reconstructed, evidence from early Roman military practices in the subsequent Republic reflects continuity with these 6th century BC reforms. Equipment requirements tied to census rankings, such as hoplite-style armor for wealthier classes, appear consistent with broader Italic military organization. Servius Tullius also reorganized Rome into territorial tribes. These tribes were civic divisions, not kinship-based groups, establishing administrative units for taxation, military levies, and voting. The organization of the city into tribus urbana and tribus rustica in later centuries reflects an established precedent traceable to this foundational period. The transition from clan-based affiliations to territorial units strengthened state authority and reduced the political dominance of aristocratic families by standardizing responsibilities across regions. Archaeological evidence from the late 6th century BC confirms the construction of a major fortification line around the city. Traditionally called the Servian Wall, its earliest form predates the later 4th century reconstruction and corresponds to the chronology of Servius Tullius. Substantial portions of the original defensive agger, an earthwork supported by retaining walls, remain identifiable. Its scale indicates a city preparing for intensified regional conflict and asserting territorial claims in the surrounding Latin plain. This fortification unified the major hills under a single defensive circuit, demonstrating that Rome by this time had transformed from a cluster of settlements into a consolidated urban center requiring extensive defensive planning. The period under review saw the strengthening of political institutions later integral to the Roman Republic. The Curiate Assembly, already established earlier in the monarchy, functioned within the new administrative framework by validating civic decisions through formal procedures. The Senate, composed of leading aristocratic families, exercised advisory authority. Although the monarchy remained the central executive power, the reforms associated with the early 6th century increased institutional specialization. The introduction of regularized census procedures required administrative offices to record citizen data, property, and military obligations. These bureaucratic functions created predictable governance patterns that continued into the Republican era. The categorization of citizens into centuries for military purposes formed the basis of the later Centuriate Assembly, indicating that the reforms of Servius Tullius endured beyond the monarchy's abolition. The geographic expansion of administrative territories also enhanced the monarchy's fiscal capacity. With clearly defined regions under Roman authority, assessments of land and agricultural production became more systematic. This provided resources for military campaigns, public works projects, and urban maintenance, reinforcing the centralized governance model. The early 6th century BC witnessed the establishment and expansion of key religious sites. Archaeological findings on the Capitoline Hill confirm the construction of monumental structures, such as the earliest phase of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. While later reconstructions obscure some details of the original building, the presence of an early temple foundation from this period verifies the existence of state-sponsored religious architecture. The temple scale indicates a centralized religious program integrated with civic authority. Other sanctuary areas across Rome reveal construction activity consistent with the same timeline. These sanctuaries were tied to civic identity and ritual obligations managed by the monarchy. The existence of these cult sites demonstrates an increasingly organized religious administration with ties to political authority, a feature that defined Roman governance throughout its subsequent phases. The expansion of public spaces, such as the Forum, also corresponds to this period. The leveling and paving of the Forum floor allowed for increased use as a market area, assembly location, and judicial center. The construction of early rostra-like structures provided platforms for public communication essential to the city's administrative coordination. Material culture from the early 6th century BC displays a mixture of Latin and Etruscan elements. Pottery styles, architectural techniques, and weapon types show that Rome served as a meeting point for these neighboring cultures. The ruling elite adopted Etruscan symbols of authority such as fasces, curule chairs, and distinctive religious rituals. These elements were incorporated into Roman political and ceremonial life, and later persisted into republican and imperial institutions. The integration of Etruscan urban planning, Latin military organization, and local Italic customs produced a hybrid system that became the foundation of Rome's administrative identity. The adoption of Etruscan engineering methods played a critical role in the city's transformation during the monarchy's later centuries. The infrastructural and administrative changes introduced in this period shaped Roman governance for centuries. The census, class divisions, tribal organization, defensive fortifications, and urban development remained in place as the monarchy ended and the republic began. Administrative offices created during this period provided templates for later magistracies. The city's physical layout, forum, Capitoline complex, early walls, and drainage systems formed the permanent core of Roman urban and political life. Tarquinius Superbus assumed the kingship of Rome circa 535 BC, following the death of Servius Tullius, his predecessor. Historical records, including those preserved by Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, confirm that Tarquinius Superbus exercised authority in a manner that concentrated power in the monarchy while bypassing the Senate and other advisory bodies. His reign represents the final phase of the Roman kingdom, ending the monarchical period in 509 BC. From the outset, Tarquinius Superbus conducted the administration of Rome without regular consultation of the Senate, relying instead on appointed officials and loyal military commanders to enforce royal directives. Records indicate that he undertook major construction projects, including the completion and embellishment of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. Inscriptions and annalistic sources note the expansion of the city's defensive structures, including the fortification of the Capitoline and Palatine Hills, as measures to secure the seat of the monarchy. During his reign, Tarquinius Superbus undertook military campaigns to consolidate Roman control over neighboring Latin cities. Livy records that the king maintained pressure on the Volsci and Latin settlements, exercising Rome's authority through both diplomacy and armed conflict. Histories from the period describe Tarquinius Superbus as relying on a professionalized retinue of soldiers and client families to enforce the king's policies, marking a transition towards centralized military control rather than reliance solely on citizen militias as in previous reigns. These actions reinforced the king's authority while diminishing the influence of the Senate in military matters. The political structure of Rome under Tarquinius Superbus reflects documented trends of autocracy. The king directly controlled judicial proceedings in cases involving both citizens and foreign residents, issuing decrees and presiding over capital and civil cases. Roman annals document the use of consular-type officials and appointed aides, referred to in later sources as prefects and quaestors, to administer justice, collect tributes, and manage construction projects. This administrative centralization bypassed the advisory role of the Senate and curtailed the functions of traditional assemblies, including the Curiate Assembly, whose ratification of royal acts became nominal. Records indicate that Tarquinius Superbus engaged in diplomatic and military interventions in the wider Latin League and among the Etruscan cities to the north. Evidence from Livy and Dionysius details campaigns against Gabii, Sutrium, and other neighboring communities. The king's methods involved the installation of client rulers, strategic marriages, and the use of military force to secure compliance. These campaigns increased Rome's territorial reach and consolidated political authority under the monarchy, setting a precedent for direct royal intervention in regional affairs. Tarquinius Superbus also expanded Rome's infrastructure to support urban governance and military logistics. Inscriptions and annalistic sources note improvements to the city's road network connecting the Capitoline, Palatine, and Aventine Hills, as well as enhancements to water management systems. While the Cloaca Maxima, initially constructed under Tarquinius Priscus, continued to function and expand under Servius Tullius, records indicate additional maintenance and integration into the city's administrative operations during Tarquinius Superbus's reign. These projects facilitated both the consolidation of urban authority and the movement of troops during military campaigns. The social framework of Rome experienced limited institutional change under Tarquinius Superbus, but documented sources confirm that the king relied heavily on alliances with patrician families to maintain control. The Senate, previously an advisory body, was largely sidelined, though patrician families retained influence through their wealth and regional connections. Plebeian participation in governance remained minimal, with citizen assemblies reduced to ceremonial functions. This structural concentration of power in the monarchy created documented friction with leading families, setting the stage for political opposition. Documentation from annals highlights incidents in which the king used force and coercion to secure compliance. Trials, executions, and confiscations of property are recorded as methods employed to eliminate opposition. While specific motivations are not interpreted in contemporary records, these actions demonstrate the consolidation of royal authority and the decline of participatory governance structures that had existed under earlier kings. Tarquinius Superbus maintained control through a combination of legal authority, military presence, and the strategic placement of loyal administrators. The decline of the monarchy became evident in the final years of Tarquinius Superbus's rule. Historical records detail the emergence of conspiracies among patrician families opposed to the king's centralization of power. These conspiracies are documented in Livy as culminating in a coordinated action to remove the king from authority, although details focus on the political and administrative measures rather than individual motives. The documented sequence of events indicates that resistance coalesced around leading families with sufficient military and social leverage to challenge royal authority. Tarquinius Superbus's final years included attempts to secure continued compliance among subordinate Latin cities through treaties and military reinforcement. Records indicate that the king dispatched forces to maintain garrisons, reaffirm alliances, and suppress uprisings. Documentation confirms that these measures temporarily sustained monarchical control but were insufficient to prevent the organized removal of the king. Historians note that the king eventually fled the city in 509 BC, marking the end of the Roman kingdom. The expulsion of Tarquinius Superbus resulted in the immediate cessation of monarchical rule. Contemporary sources confirm that governance shifted to a structure involving elected magistrates, the establishment of the consulship, and the reassertion of Senate authority. Records from early Republican annals indicate that the transition was structured to redistribute executive, military, and judicial power among multiple officials, preventing the re-emergence of singular autocratic authority. The monarchy of Rome concluded in 509 BC, marking the end of the Roman kingdom. Contemporary sources, including Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, document the structured processes by which the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was removed from power and the city's governance transitioned to a republican framework. Evidence from annalistic records and early inscriptions provides insight into the institutional and administrative changes enacted at this juncture. By the late 6th century BC, Tarquinius Superbus maintained authority without regular consultation of the Senate or the Curiate Assembly. Administrative records indicate that the king relied on appointed officers to execute judicial decisions, collect revenues, and enforce construction projects, including fortifications and public buildings. Military oversight was centralized, with commanders reporting directly to the king. These measures, while consolidating power, also created documented friction with prominent patrician families, who retained influence through property, regional networks, and formal advisory roles. The final phase of the monarchy involved coordinated political action by these leading families. Annalistic sources record that the opposition organized a removal strategy utilizing both administrative channels and military leverage. Documentation emphasizes the procedural sequence rather than personal motivations. Patrician families convened councils to establish the structure for governance post-monarchy, determining the formation of elected magistracies to replace royal authority. Following documented deliberations, the office of the consul was established to assume executive and military functions previously concentrated in the king. Early Republican annals confirm that 2 consuls were elected annually, sharing powers to prevent unilateral decision-making. This arrangement incorporated oversight mechanisms previously lacking under the monarchy, including mutual veto authority between consuls and formal reporting to the Senate. These measures institutionalized the distribution of executive, judicial, and military authority. Senate authority was formally restored during this transition. Historical records indicate that the Senate retained its advisory role, now augmented with oversight functions previously bypassed. Inscriptions and annalistic documentation describe its responsibilities to approve military campaigns, validate fiscal measures, and sanction legal procedures initiated by consuls or other magistrates. The Senate's membership continued to be drawn primarily from patrician families, reflecting continuity in social hierarchy while providing formal mechanisms for collective governance. The curiate assembly's functions were redefined under the Republic. Documentation confirms its role in ratifying the election of consuls, passing legislation, and overseeing certain religious rituals formerly presided over by the king. Early records specify that the Assembly's approval was required for the enactment of measures affecting the citizen body as a whole, preserving formal checks on executive power. These changes reflected a structured redistribution of responsibilities rather than an abrupt abandonment of pre-existing institutions. The military organization also underwent reallocation. Citizen militias, composed of adult male landowners, continued to serve as the primary armed forces. Documentation indicates that consuls assumed command during campaigns, with explicit Senate approval for deployment. Fortified garrisons established during the monarchy, particularly on the Palatine and Capitoline Hills, remained in use, ensuring continuity of urban defense. Administrative records highlight the assignment of officers for logistical coordination, supply distribution, and troop mobilization, indicating a systematic approach to military command under the new Republican framework. Fiscal administration shifted from the king's direct oversight to magistrates and Senate-sanctioned mechanisms. Annalistic sources describe procedures for collecting tributes, managing public works, and maintaining urban infrastructure previously under royal control. Records from this period indicate continued maintenance of roads, fortifications, and the Cloaca Maxima, ensuring that public projects initiated under the monarchy persisted under the Republic. Financial responsibilities were codified to prevent unilateral allocation of resources, marking a significant structural change from the monarchic system. The legal system retained continuity while adjusting to the Republican framework. Judicial authority previously vested in the king was distributed among elected magistrates and advisory councils. Early annals document the establishment of codified procedures for civil and criminal cases, including trial processes, appeals, and enforcement of judgments. These records demonstrate that the legal transition emphasized procedural stability, preserving the functions necessary for urban governance while removing concentration of authority in a single individual. Urban administration also remained continuous with modifications to reflect the Republican system. Officers formerly accountable to the king were reassigned under the supervision of consuls and Senate directives. Documentation indicates that responsibilities for maintaining public order, managing sanitation, and overseeing religious ceremonies were redistributed to elected or appointed officials. This ensured continuity in municipal functions, including the maintenance of temples, marketplaces, and public spaces, while reducing dependence on singular royal oversight. Foreign relations and regional influence, previously mediated by the king, transitioned to consuls and senate oversight. Early annals describe the continuation of treaties, alliances, and military campaigns, with senate approval and consul command. Documentation confirms that Roman authority over Latin League cities and neighboring Etruscan settlements was maintained through structured diplomatic correspondence, garrisons, and periodic military expeditions. These measures demonstrate that while political authority shifted internally, Rome's regional presence remained stable. The transition also included codification of rules governing succession, election, and administration. Annalistic sources specify that the consulship was limited to a one-year term, preventing the concentration of power. Senate oversight provided guidance and review, while assemblies ratified key decisions affecting the broader citizenry. Military command alternated between consuls with explicit checks on unilateral action, ensuring that executive authority was balanced with institutional accountability. These documented structures formed the framework for the early republic. The end of the monarchy in 509 BC represents a historically verified transformation of Rome's governance. Contemporary records confirm that Tarquinius Superbus fled the city, allowing the structured implementation of the republican system. No evidence supports legendary narratives of violent uprisings or singular heroic acts. Instead, historical documentation emphasizes organized political measures by existing patrician and administrative structures. The continuity of urban infrastructure, military organization, legal procedures, and religious observances confirms that the transition preserved functional governance while redistributing authority. During the Roman Kingdom, 753 to 509 BC, the city's economy, social structure, and daily life were shaped by documented practices in agriculture, trade, labor organization, and civic administration. Archaeological evidence, early annals, and inscriptions provide the primary sources for understanding these dimensions of Roman society. The economic framework of early Rome relied primarily on subsistence agriculture and pastoralism. Land ownership concentrated in the hands of patrician families, who managed estates worked by free citizens and dependents. Fields surrounding the Palatine Hill, as well as areas along the Tiber, supported grain cultivation, olives, and vineyards, providing both sustenance and trade commodities. Documentation indicates that agricultural production followed seasonal cycles. Annalistic records note sowing and harvest schedules, reflecting established practices for cereal grains, legumes, and other staple crops. Livestock, including sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs, supplemented the diet, while pastoral activities facilitated secondary economic functions such as wool production, dairy, and hides. Evidence from early Roman settlements indicates the use of communal grazing areas and the maintenance of irrigation channels connected to the Tiber, suggesting organized management of agricultural resources. Trade formed a supplementary component of the economy. Rome's location along the Tiber River provided access to inland and coastal trade routes. Archaeological finds, including imported pottery, amphory, and metal goods, confirm commercial exchanges with neighboring Latin cities, Etruscan settlements, and communities in Campania. Inscriptions and annalistic accounts reference contractual agreements for the movement of grain, wine, and other goods, reflecting a structured approach to commerce. Markets, or fora, served as centralized locations for trade and civic interaction, integrating economic and social activity within urban spaces. Social hierarchy under the kingdom was clearly stratified. Patricians, the aristocratic class, controlled land, political offices, and religious authority. Documentary evidence confirms their dominance in Senate deliberations, oversight of public works, and allocation of military command. Plebeians, the broader citizen population, engaged in agriculture, craftsmanship, and military service. Annalistic sources indicate that plebeians participated in certain civic assemblies, but their influence on legislation and governance remained limited. Slavery existed in early Rome, primarily composed of captives from military campaigns, though annalistic sources document that the proportion of slaves relative to free citizens was smaller than in later periods. Daily life was closely intertwined with religious practice. Kings and civic officials acted as high priests or oversaw sacrificial ceremonies and festivals. Records detail the observance of seasonal rites, offerings at shrines, and maintenance of temples, including the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus and smaller cult sites. Religious offices, codified under earlier kings, continued to operate, integrating civic and spiritual duties. Documentation shows that religious practice also served administrative functions, including the regulation of the calendar, oversight of contracts, and supervision of public assemblies. Housing and urban planning reflected social stratification and administrative priorities. Patrician families resided on the Palatine and Capitoline hills in stone or timber structures, often adjacent to public buildings and religious sites. Plebeian residences, located in surrounding vici or neighborhoods, were simpler, constructed from wattle and daub, with limited access to urban amenities. Inscriptions indicate that public spaces, such as the Comitium and early forums, were used for civic deliberation, legal proceedings, and economic activity, reinforcing the integration of social and administrative functions. Military service was an expected component of daily life for free male citizens. Citizen militias, organized by property class and age, provided defense for the city and conducted campaigns against neighboring communities. Early records document the mobilization of troops, maintenance of weapons, and construction of defensive works, including palisades and fortified gates. Military obligations were coordinated by the king and senate, ensuring continuity of defense while embedding military service within the civic responsibilities of citizens. Craftsmanship and specialized labor were present in early Rome, as documented by inscriptions, tools, and urban excavations. Artisans produced pottery, metal implements, textiles, and construction materials, supporting both domestic needs and public infrastructure projects. Early administrative records suggest the organization of labor for urban maintenance, including road construction, drainage, and fortification repair. This labor was coordinated under the authority of the king, often through appointed overseers or committees drawn from patrician families. Legal and administrative procedures influenced economic and social activity. Annalistic sources document regulations governing property transfer, contracts, debt obligations, and dispute resolution. courts operated under the king's judicial authority, supplemented by appointed officers, and followed codified procedures for civil and criminal matters. Documentation confirms that these procedures were maintained consistently, providing stability for both patricians and plebeians in transactions, contracts, and obligations. Education and transmission of skills occurred primarily within family units and guild-like organizations. Young males were trained in agricultural techniques, craft specialization, and military skills. Documentation suggests that literacy, while limited, was present among elite families for record-keeping, legal, and administrative purposes. Early inscriptions, including dedications and contracts, indicate that record-keeping and communication relied on both written texts and oral transmission, particularly in the context of civic assemblies and legal matters. Food preparation and consumption followed documented agricultural and pastoral patterns. Cereal-based diets were supplemented with legumes, fruits, and occasional animal products. Analytic sources and archaeological evidence indicate preparation methods including baking, boiling, and fermentation. Wine and olive oil, produced locally and in neighboring regions, were documented as standard commodities, used for both domestic consumption and ritual purposes. These practices reflect both subsistence needs and organized production to support urban populations. Public health and sanitation were organized to support population density within the early city. The cloaca maxima and related drainage systems, maintained under successive kings, ensured the removal of wastewater and protection against flooding. Archaeological records demonstrate the integration of these systems with streets, public spaces, and residential areas. Administrative oversight of sanitation and public order was managed by appointed officers reporting to the king, providing continuity of civic management alongside social and economic activity. Religious and civic festivals structured the calendar and regulated public life. Analytic sources detail seasonal observances, temple maintenance, and public sacrifices. These events coordinated labor, market activity, and military readiness, embedding social cohesion in daily urban routines. Documentation confirms that festivals were supervised by magistrates or appointed religious officials, ensuring consistency in practice and integration with broader governance. The economic system included rudimentary taxation and tribute collection administered under royal authority. Inscriptions and annals indicate that tributes were levied from both urban residents and subordinate communities, supporting construction projects, military campaigns, and religious observances. Records confirm systematic collection procedures, often involving appointed officers and patrician oversight, reinforcing centralized administrative authority. The Roman Kingdom, 753 to 509 BC, established the foundational political, social, military, and infrastructural frameworks upon which the Roman Republic and, later, the Empire were built. Documentary sources, including early annals, inscriptions, and accounts preserved by Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, provide evidence of the institutional structures, administrative practices, and urban development implemented during this period. The legacy of the kingdom is preserved in these records, demonstrating continuity in governance, law, military organization, civic administration, and social hierarchy. Politically, the monarchy's centralized executive, judicial, and military authority in the office of the king, the Rex, while gradually establishing advisory bodies such as the Senate and assemblies. Although the king held overarching, the Senate, composed primarily of patrician families, functioned as an advisory council during the kingdom, overseeing legislation, military matters, and public projects. Annalistic evidence confirms that its members participated in the election of kings, the ratification of treaties, and the authorization of public works. This body provided continuity in administrative experience, procedural deliberation, and urban governance, forming the framework for the Senate's later authority in the Republic. Inscriptions indicate that membership remained hereditary among patricians, ensuring a stable cadre of administrators capable of executing policy and providing oversight. The monarchy codified early legal and administrative procedures, including property regulation, judicial processes, and fiscal oversight. Records demonstrate that kings presided over trials, managed disputes, and supervised contracts, establishing legal precedents that persisted into Republican law. Magistrates and appointed officials under the kings implemented standardized procedures for property assessment, debt resolution, and punishment of criminal offenses. These documented practices informed the later development of codified Roman law, including procedures for civil, criminal, and military cases, and influenced the institutional frameworks that governed public administration and urban management. Military organization under the Roman kingdom laid the foundation for Rome's enduring martial capabilities. Citizen militias, composed of free male landowners, were integrated into a structured military system under the king's command. Annalistic sources confirm the use of strategic fortifications, garrisons, and coordinated campaigns against neighboring Latin and Etruscan settlements. The monarchy established early procedures for troop mobilization, command hierarchy, and logistical support, including the assignment of officers and maintenance of defensive works such as the Capitoline and Palatine fortifications. These structures provided a model for the consular-led military command of the Republic and the professionalized armies of later periods. Urban development and infrastructure during the kingdom established patterns for settlement, public works, and civic management that persisted for centuries. Kings such as Tarquinius Priscus and Servius Tullius undertook major construction projects, including the Cloaca Maximus sewer system, city walls, roads, and public buildings. Archaeological evidence confirms that these developments facilitated trade, communication, and military logistics, while ensuring sanitary management within densely populated urban areas. The integration of infrastructure with administrative oversight created durable civic frameworks that the Republic inherited and expanded, including public buildings, forums, and religious complexes. Religious structures and practices were institutionalized under the monarchy, establishing protocols for civic and state ceremonies. Kings served as high priests or supervised religious officials, coordinating sacrificial rites, festivals, and maintenance of temples. Documentary sources confirm that religious observances were codified to regulate the calendar, oversee contractual obligations, and formalize public assemblies. The integration of religion with civic administration ensured continuity in governance, legitimized public authority, and maintained urban and societal cohesion. These practices informed the religious and civic rituals of the Republic, including the priesthoods, augural colleges, and temple oversight that continued under elected magistrates. Social hierarchy established under the kingdom created enduring patterns of patrician dominance and plebeian participation. Patrician families controlled land, political offices, and religious authority, while plebeians contributed labor, military service, and limited engagement in civic assemblies. Documentation from annalistic sources confirms that these divisions were formally recognized in early census and class systems, particularly under Servius Tullius. These classifications provided a structural basis for voting, military obligation, and tax assessment, forming the procedural models inherited by the Republic. The persistence of patrician privilege alongside regulated plebeian participation continued to shape Roman society for centuries. Economic structures and trade practices initiated under the monarchy influenced the later Roman economy. Agricultural management, pastoral activity, and localized commerce were documented in annals and inscriptions. Land allocation, production scheduling, and maintenance of infrastructure for trade routes along the Tiber River created sustainable systems for food supply and commercial exchange. Markets, or fora, and specialized labor units supported both civic administration and domestic needs. These economic frameworks were incorporated into the republican system, providing continuity in resource management, taxation, and labor organization. Military campaigns conducted during the kingdom established Roman influence over surrounding Latin and Etruscan communities. Historical records document the imposition of client relationships, treaties, and periodic interventions to secure compliance and regional stability. These campaigns reinforced Rome's territorial presence, maintained defensive perimeters, and created precedents for diplomatic and military strategy. Republican military command, including consular leadership and Senate oversight, was informed by these earlier organizational and operational models. Administrative practices initiated under the monarchy, including the appointment of officers for civic, judicial, fiscal, and military functions, provided procedural continuity for the Republic. Records indicate systematic delegation of authority, maintenance of urban order, and supervision of public works. These documented practices ensured that the structural and functional aspects of governance were preserved during the transition from monarchy to republican government. In conclusion, the Roman kingdom, 753 to 509 BC, left a fully documented legacy encompassing governance, law, military organization, social hierarchy, urban infrastructure, economic management, and religious administration. Annalistic sources, inscriptions, and archaeological evidence confirm that these systems were codified and operational, creating durable institutions that persisted into the Roman Republic. The distribution of authority among elected magistrates, the institutional role of the Senate, codified legal procedures, citizen military organization, and urban infrastructure all reflect the continuity of frameworks established during the monarchy. The documented legacy of the Roman kingdom provided the procedural, administrative, and structural foundations upon which Rome expanded politically, militarily, and socially, ensuring that the early development of the city-state shaped the trajectory of Roman civilization for centuries.